Hi, and welcome to the Holly Troxel presentation of Boise Startup Week 2020. We are all virtual here, and we're very pleased to be a sponsor and a participant in Boise Startup Week 2020. Thanks to TM Rastegar and the others who've helped us navigate and arrange this presentation today. My name is Brad Fraser. I'm a partner at the law firm Holly Troxel. I practice intellectual property law, internet law, and information technology law, which includes now privacy and data security. My guest today is a dear friend, Nancy Casperson. Nancy is a dear friend and a client. And Nancy is the CEO of the Boise startup. Not really a startup anymore, Nancy, but at one time when Nancy and I first met many years ago, it was a startup here in Boise. Nancy Casperson is the CEO of Quit with Nancy, a tremendously successful tobacco cessation program. So Nancy, would you take just a few minutes and tell our guests about you, your background? You have a stellar background as a nurse and medical professional. Tell them about your program, tobacco cessation, about your success. And then at that point, we'll switch over and talk a little bit about what you and I do together. So Nancy, please.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. Hope you're enjoying and learning a lot in the Startup Week information. So I try to not go back to kindergarten when I tell my history, so I won't go back that far, but I will go back to, I was a good kid and I never broke any of the rules until I got to college, made it through college without really breaking rules. Then I got to nursing school, and it was a Catholic nursing school. I shouldn't probably say that. The nuns were very mean, and me and everyone else in the early 1970s, we all started smoking. So I usually have a fake cigarette with me, but I'd have to use a pen. So really my career of tobacco interest began with my first drag off of a cigarette. I'm a person who loved the first cigarette, loved every cigarette in between. At the age of 32, I got diagnosed with early emphysema, and I was living in Haley, Idaho. I was a skier and a hiker and a nurse, and I was having breathing trouble and no one could help me quit. So I spent 3 years struggling myself, thinking I must be stupid or what is wrong with me or whatever. So this is in the 1980s. The patch had just been released. It was prescription only, and not a doctor that I knew would even write for me to have the patches. Nobody knew anything. So after 3 years, a lot of I'd say the moon and the stars lined up, and I was able to quit, but it actually was a lot of work and a lot of frustration. So I continued in my nursing career for a couple more years, and I was just dissatisfied seeing how many people came in that were sick and dying and nobody would help them with their cigarette addiction or tobacco. So I shifted my career in 1990 and focused on learning about tobacco education. And I have studied with everyone I could find around the country to learn what other people have found out. And the science now and the medical treatment is so much more advanced than when I quit back in the 1980s. And I've taken all this knowledge. Most of the people I've learned from are PhD, MD, PhD, and then a bunch of other letters. I don't even know what they are. And they don't speak English very well. And it's very difficult for a smoker in Idaho to relate to a PhD, MD in the way they speak. So I kept coming back to Idaho trying to work with a lot of folks in Idaho. I worked with the health districts for years. And I had to take that scientific medical information and distill it into something that was usable and understandable. And from my perspective, fun. Like if I'm not having fun, I want to leave the class. So I spent from 1990 until today studying tobacco addiction, tobacco treatment, now vape, and any kind of those other things that have come on the market. And I built from scratch a program that integrated all the knowledge I'd learned, but also integrated storytelling, because Brad knows I love to talk and tell stories. And it evolved from a little thing, and it got bigger and bigger. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs who have an idea, and then it feels like you're picked up by some like giant, I don't know if it's a monster or a swan, but I was picked up by this idea that I had, that I could take my ideas and my program and convert it into something that I could reach thousands and tens of thousands of people and help them. And through the health districts, I traveled around the state for 10 years and worked with about 1,000 people a year. And people started bringing cameras to my class and filming. And everything in my class was mine, but I didn't know anything about intellectual property. So I just said, don't film, I'm going to film. So I started another company, a video production company. And it's a side of my other company. It was too expensive to hire a video company because my program's 8 hours. And the people's response was, you've got to make this film because my husband couldn't come to class. You've got to turn this into a DVD so we can watch it at home when we relapse. So I jumped into, like many entrepreneurs, I jumped into something I had no idea what I was getting into. If I knew what I was getting into, I probably would have backed away and kind of like turned the headlights off, but I didn't know. I thought it would be 4 to 5 months to make this 8-hour video, but I hired a professional video cinematographer, and it took us a year and a half. And that was from filming to editing to all the script writing and all that stuff. And then I ended up during that time realizing I had something with, I knew I owned something, but I really didn't know much about what I owned as far as copyright or any of that. So one of my employees started doing a little copyright research and intellectual property stuff, and we were planning like everything else. We did everything our own self because we're a small company. I usually have 2 to 4 to 5 people working for me. So as a CEO of a small company, you really have to do a lot of things that I was never trained for. My program has been incredibly successful. When it was a live class only, it was successful. And when I turned it into the DVD, I never knew would adults sit and watch an 8-hour DVD with me talking. And so we contracted with a local hospital. I started doing classes there, and it blew my mind. People actually sat in a classroom for 8 hours in a week period of time and watched the DVD. And they all said, nobody ever taught me this. Why didn't I know this? Why doesn't my doctor know this? And so the content in the video DVD became my basis of how I would distribute my program because it's more scalable. And then Brad told me I probably needed to think about putting it online because a lot of people don't have DVD players. But that, of course, was 5, 6 years ago. And I thought, nah, everybody has DVD. So now my program is I work with corporations to help their employees. I work with hospitals to help their patients. I work with community organizations to help. Actually, I just want to help anybody. And so my DVD now has been converted into an online program, and people love the online program because, like we're all learning, there's a lot of time that you can use your computer for education or socialization or whatever. And so now my program's available with different formats. And just so you know, I've said this to Brad probably quite a few times, my goal is always to reach 1 million people. I'm at about 20,000, so I'm going for expansion in 2021. I've got some contracts coming up that are going to let me expand. And Brad rescued me from the pit of intellectual property despair, like a tar pit. And so, Brad, I'll let him tell you how I snuck into your class, sort of. I didn't snuck, I paid $50 actually, but tell him how we met and then how the journey began, because I was about to make the pit of despair mistake.
Well, thank you, Nancy. That is a tremendous overview of your company and your programs and your success. So thank you for sharing that with us and with the audience. So as Nancy mentioned, she and I met first about, I think, 10 or more years ago. I was teaching a class at Boise State called Protecting Your Internet Brand. And sitting in the middle of the audience was this attentive looking woman and 2 of her staff members. And they asked a lot of very insightful, really excellent questions. And that, of course, was Nancy and her team. And so after the seminar, Nancy called and we began this journey together of following, I guess we'll call it my model. Nancy has a tobacco cessation program. I have an intellectual property monetization program. And we began together on that journey of identifying Nancy's intellectual property and then protecting that intellectual property together. And now Nancy is in fact monetizing that intellectual property. So we started fundamentally, and we talked to Nancy and her team about very fundamental brand issues. We started at the basic level with trademarks, and Nancy has now assembled an impressive portfolio of trademarks. Nancy, talk to our guests a little bit about the importance of your brand. Quit with Nancy. How do you get that brand out there? And talk to the audience a little bit about the effort and value you see in protecting that brand.
Okay. First of all, it's always funny when memories of an incident don't exactly match. So Brad remembers it one way. What I remember is Brad took pity on me and he called and offered to talk to me on the phone. And by the time the phone call was done, I had to hire him because I realized I was just about to step off the cliff of despair. So it was a wonderful intro into Brad's integrity, but also he knows stuff I never would have known, and I could have made some really, really serious errors. So with branding, it's interesting because today I asked Brad to not use my official company name. And like a lot of companies, when I started out, I picked a name, just a corporate name, and it had nothing to do with tobacco. And then somebody told me that's a dumb name for your company, so I changed it. And over the years, I changed my company name a couple of times. So my actual company is Quit and Live Global Inc. And my program used to be Quit and Live Tobacco Cessation. But what I found is that when people would take my class, no one ever knew the company name and nobody knew the name of the program, the official name. And people said, oh, I just told people to go to Nancy's class. So I went to put this into a video and I had probably 50 people say, you can't call a DVD Quit and Live Global Inc. DVD. So I said, what am I going to call it? And they said, Quit with Nancy. And I thought, oh my God, I can't call it that. But I had the vote of so many people, including my biggest corporate contract supervisor said, that's what we tell our employees, quit with Nancy, go to Nancy. So that became my brand. So even though I have this other name and it's all registered and trademarked or whatever, my company brand is Quit with Nancy because people associate me with the program. And now all the things I've done and all the marketing I've done and advertising, any of that now is identifying me because I am pretty much the program. If you watch my program, I'm the teacher in it, but it's like watching like watching a documentary. I'm the narrator, but we have lots of other people involved and a lot of interviews involved and a lot of magical video stuff happens in it. But the brand has really been a successful way for my outreach of what I am and what I do and what my product is to reach people and connect with them. So I have felt like that was a really important step. Brad, I didn't want to take that step. So
well, that's great, Nancy. And you, because of your personality and because you built this from the ground up, the brand really is you. It's you personally. But we can't register your physical being with the trademark office. But we did register certain of your trademarks, Quit with Nancy and the logo. So we have over time assembled a very good portfolio of registered trademarks to help support that brand, which is Nancy Casperson. And the Nancy has been very, very good about getting domain names in place. And we'll talk later about her efforts to take the program online, which has different intellectual property implications. But one thing that was important with Nancy is that because, as you know from her story, this was her product. She integrated materials from a lot of other sources, but at the end of the day, Nancy wrote every word. Nancy recorded every bit of video. Nancy said and spoke everything. So this truly was Nancy's, and the copyright law term now is these were her works of authorship. Nancy authored all this. And so she assembled an impressive body of courseware. You all are familiar with the term courseware, a learning educational system, courseware. And so in addition to protecting her brand using trademark law and domain names and internet practices, we recognize that this body of courseware was protectable using copyright law, as is any video or book or poster or photograph. And Nancy was the author. So we worked with Nancy to assemble all of the materials into a cohesive package, for lack of a better term, and then we registered the copyright. And Nancy owns as well now an impressive portfolio of registered copyrights. And Nancy, you may not have a lot of comment about the copyright piece of it, but you and I have talked a lot about this. Tell me about your thoughts about the nature of authorship and writing all those works and the importance of protecting that from an author's perspective.
Well, I really probably never had a lot of thought about it before you, Brad. Like I might get a book from the library and I like pages 10 through 20, so I'd stick them on my copy machine. Shouldn't say that. But I never really thought from the perspective of the author or the creator or the artist or the musician. And once I learned that, I'd spent literally now like a lot of years developing, and I still develop new materials. I'm so grateful that I realized that the copyright of my materials protects me from people, not just a simple theft, but like a theft of my whole program. And it's funny because most people who deal with tobacco are government agencies, and they don't care if people take their stuff, but mine is mine. And so I have learned over the years from Brad that it's critical that when you produce a piece, whether it's a video or online, or you're doing, like I have a lot of supporting materials. I created an entire year of another intellectual property, which was Train the Trainer. I never planned to train trainers, but then I found out I had to train trainers because I can't be in 10 places at once. So my Train the Trainer materials are all copyrighted. And what I have found is I think there's people out there who literally would steal stuff from anybody and not care. And then there's people who just don't understand. So I had in the beginning a lot of people who would get my DVD and then they'd start using it in ways that was not, they were using it in ways that were illegal with copyright law. And I was able to go to them and say, look, this is all copyrighted. This is my materials. If you want to use it, that's fine. But we need to have a licensing agreement, and what that will be, what I will give you, and I will give you permission, and then how much you're going to pay me. So I can make money off of. And I would have never, Brad, I would have never, ever thought of that part, especially the legal paperwork part. Oh my God. But it's a way that I can sort of pull people back from using my materials in a way that's not appropriate.
So. Nancy, thank you. That's perfect. And so you've made a great segue to what I wanted to talk about next, which is licensing. So as Nancy protected her brand and her trademarks using trademark registrations, and she obtained the internet real estate that she needed to support her brand, and as we coalesced her works of authorship, the workbooks, the questionnaires, the checklists, everything that Nancy authored, we protected that using copyright law. That then permitted Nancy to take the first step toward monetizing all this intellectual property. And she mentioned the term licensing. So what we did is we then turned to contract law, and we developed a series of courseware licenses, written contracts for Nancy to use. So now when Quit with Nancy goes to a hospital or to a university or to a medical insurance provider, she'll present them with a courseware license agreement. And that will say something like, Nancy owns the brand, Quit with Nancy. Nancy owns all of the intellectual property in this content, the images and sounds on the DVD, the text on the written pages, the illustrations on the written pages. Nancy owns the copyright. And so if you wish to use those and not get sued by Nancy and her high-priced lawyer, then you better take some type of a license agreement. And so Nancy's had, I think, I'll ask Nancy, maybe it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I mean, in general, the courseware license that we developed now, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, it's been a pretty good document. Talk to the audience a little bit, Nancy, about your efforts to use licensing to monetize your intellectual property.
Well, again, it's the kind of part of me that was never trained and never had any interest in legal documents. Right. And I had to learn that because I'm a small company and I have to protect my intellectual property, I have to learn how to read legal documents. And what I found is over the years, I did everything in the old-fashioned way, which I'd sit down, I'd talk to somebody, and we'd make some verbal agreement, and then I would hope that they'd pay me and they'd whatever. And what I found is that sometimes the purpose for Brad doing what he does is to protect me and help me be not safe, but I guess protected from people who would maybe use my materials and not pay me, or use my materials and then distribute them, change them, put their name on them, all that. And the biggest legal contract that we developed was about 8 years ago. And the good thing about it, it's carried me through a 5-year contract, and then it still carries me because that big contract was so comprehensive that all we do now is we just renew it year by year, which I like, because then I don't have to read 17 pages of contract stuff again. And we just say, change the dates. Is there any terms that are different? And so it's been like, that was a long time ago that I paid you to write that big contract, Brad. And it has served, because now it is just a stepping stone to extend another year and another year. And I feel more professional. I look back on how I used to just kind of like, okay, let's do this and let's do that. That from protecting my company and my financial situations, I've got to have contracts. I mean, I personally think without them over the last 10 years, I could have ended up in financial, or in a lawsuit. But the contracts help, because the contracts help. Then I'm clear, and the company that I'm working with, or the people I'm working with, they're clear. And it's amazing how many times those contracts, literally, I've just said on page 7, right there, it states this. And then if they don't agree, then we have to go back to Brad and do something different, but we don't do that.
and so, Nancy, your courseware license agreement is a good example of combining contract law principles and intellectual property law principles. So, I mean, we've protected your intellectual property, your trademarks, your copyrights. Those are protected, and we could go to court if we had to. But we also chose to put particular provisions into your licenses, which say specifically, you may not copy this content. You may not reuse it. You may not reuse it to train a trainer. You may not take the courseware and go engage at a hospital. So Nancy's been very smart about using a combination of intellectual property law and contract law to protect her intellectual property and her creations and her works of authorship. Nancy, as the CEO, talk to me a little bit about I guess this is a leading question, and you alluded to it a moment ago. When you go in to see a new client, do you have, I'm going to assume you have a little bit more confidence walking in with your briefcase, knowing that you've protected your intellectual property, you have something to offer, a valuable product. Here's my license. Tell me about your ability to market and sell your product, knowing we've done all these fundamentals. Does it increase your confidence?
Well, it does. It increases my confidence, not in relationship to selling Nancy and Quit with Nancy.
Sure.
Because I'm pretty confident about that piece.
Sure.
But what the confident piece is that I've got the legal documents that will protect me from me making a mistake, or them accidentally or purposefully taking my content. So the confidence comes, I think, in the combination, Brad, of like, I know my program, I've used it so much, I've had so much feedback. I'm so confident in that and my ability to help people with my program. But the like the behind me piece of it is like, Brad's right back here. It's like, don't give it away anymore. And it's not that I don't trust people. I really think it's a complicated situation with copyright. And, so I think you're right. I do feel confident, because there's a lot of places where people don't want to mess with contracts. But that then tells me something like, well, then if you don't want to negotiate with my contracts and with my lawyer, then we probably can't go any further, because I need that protection. So, right. Yeah, I think it's been great.
Well, thanks, Nancy. Now, as you mentioned earlier, you have now taken the program and we're placing it online, which was quite an effort. And in terms of the in terms of the intellectual property issues that created, you may remember you and I had some discussions about making sure you own all the intellectual property. Because when you take a medium and place it into a different format, or a different medium, like take textual materials and place it into a video, we have to make sure that you retained ownership of all the intellectual property. So we went to some effort to make sure that everybody, the videographers, the editors, everybody who worked on the code writers, everybody who turned it into the app and who put it onto the internet, we had to make sure that your company, Quit and Live Global Inc., owned the intellectual property rights. You may not be able to comment on that, Nancy, but do you recall that effort in that process? How hard was it? How hard was it to get people to play ball? I often hear people say, oh, I can't ask my code writer to sign this. I can't ask my videographer to sign this. They won't give me the intellectual property. Nancy, can you comment on that? Did you have hard experiences getting your intellectual property when you put everything online? Talk about that.
I think it's, personally, I've had both experiences, Brad. There's people who just say, oh, sure, no problem. My video guy was like, sure, no problem. He was a contractor, and he's a great video guy. He's a great graphic designer. He produced most of my visual materials. He produced and the video. And he was just like, sure, he's been doing it a long time. He knows if he's working for me, then so he signed without any question. I've had more challenges with other entities. For some reason, the biggest challenges I've had is hiring someone to develop my websites, where they are the coder and they think they own the code. And that's been, I've not had good experiences with that.
Right.
And
you know what, Nancy, nobody does. And that's why I asked.
Okay.
And so the point was, thank you for not having Nancy go, oh, it was a piece of cake, everybody signed.
No.
But to have Nancy highlight that problem so that our audience knows that our goal is to make sure that all the intellectual property resides in your company. Why? Well, you, the entrepreneur here at Startup Week, may at some point want to go speak to a venture capitalist or an angel investor or a bank and ask for some money. Now, Nancy has bootstrapped and Nancy has not sought in a lot of outside investment, but you may want to go to do a pitch to a VC or to an angel. Right. And one of the questions they're going to ask you is, do you own all your intellectual property? So what that entails is exactly what Nancy's done. She's the author, it's the sole author of all of her content. And if she ever had to use a third person, like a videographer or a software programmer to help her get her content online, she was scrupulous about making sure that she did her best to own that intellectual property with, again, the proper contract. So, Nancy, I'm glad to hear you say honestly that sometimes it was easy and sometimes it wasn't. But the point for today's session is that we want to focus on that to make sure that we do own all of our intellectual property. So, Nancy, how is it going with getting the program online? Do you have subscribers who are now, the beautiful thing about putting the program online, because it works, it's such a powerful tobacco cessation tool, Nancy. You can go now from the 20,000 to that 1 million number that you seek. How's the traction going on the internet?
It's interesting. There's tobacco use and vape use is an addictive disorder. It's an addictive disease, just like alcoholism or just like cocaine. So first of all, you have to understand the population that I'm trying to reach often doesn't want to be reached. And addiction treatment is, like I tell people, it's like all of us have a head and it's a big puzzle and we have all these puzzle pieces. And if you just look at the puzzle pieces of someone who's addicted and using a substance, there's like pieces that fell on the floor and they're under the table and you can't find the pieces. So when you start to try to pull all that together, you have to understand a lot of the people are very reluctant. They're discouraged, they're embarrassed, they feel shameful. They just say, I like it, I don't want to quit. So one of the best ways to work with people is in groups, which we've done, for 20 years. And people walk in a group with 20 people who smoke, chew, or vape, and they're complete strangers. And by the end of the first night, they're all bonded together because addiction does that. Whether it's in a classroom learning or out on the street smoking a cigarette together, it pulls people together. So the live groups, I think, are the best, but that's also doesn't help me reach 1 million people.
Right.
The DVD allows people at home to watch it with other people. So, it's old fashioned, right? But you load it in the DVD player, you sit down on the couch with beer and a cigarette or whatever, and you have a couple people in your family who are either users or support people. So the group interaction with addiction is a powerful piece. The online piece is somebody sitting on their computer or on their phone doing it by themselves. So where it works really well is someone who is basically mandated by the courts or mandated by their insurance company or mandated, you've got to take this program or you're going to keep paying the higher insurance premium at your company. Here's your higher premium. If you Quit with Nancy, I'm the reasonable alternative. You get $100 off your insurance every month. So people who are mandated will sit and go through the online program because they can just do it on their own. They click through it. They can get through it really quick. There's no interaction, although we still do phone support with those folks. Mm-hmm. But the challenge is if they're not mandated and they're just sitting home or, like it's harder for people individually to become engaged in the program when they don't have to. So what we're doing now is we're doing virtual online classes.
Right.
Because then we didn't start out that when we first got the online going, we got to go in January 2019, and it wasn't a virtual class. But now we're doing everything. They can watch it on their own. They can do a virtual class just like this, but we could have 10 smokers in this class. And we use the DVD. My facilitators, who are nurses, are the coaches for that. So we've had to keep kind of adapting like we all are now. What's the technology? How do we use it in a way that reaches our goals, helps us reach our goals, and helps our clients? So the feedback on the online program is fantastic.
Right.
People love it. They can start watching it and then they go to the coffee shop and they're on their phone or their tablet. So it's very convenient. It's very easy for them, especially people who are employees. I think that's where we've had our most enthusiastic participants is employees who are doing it as part of their wellness benefit, or they're doing it as part of their insurance premiums. So it's kind of like flexible. There's a lot of flexible ways to reach people now.
Right. And Nancy, that's a great story. And because you and I have paid attention to intellectual property and contract law foundational principles, as you move the content to different media, so, there's no stopping you now. We've moved it onto the internet. Mm-hmm. And so you'll have distribution in foreign countries. And I'm sure that the million participant number is just around the corner for you, Nancy. But let me ask this question. Because we have worked hard to develop and protect your intellectual property and put a good fence around this thing that Nancy has invented here. Tell me how much longer you think you want to be the CEO of a startup of this kind of, well, no longer a startup. How much longer do you want to be the CEO? And I'm not asking you, well, Nancy, are you going to sell your company? But how much longer do you think you want to do this? And then talk to me about your feelings about how well we've positioned this thing if you ever do decide to sell it, because you've got a very incredible asset here.
Right. Sometimes it's like anyone who has a job. Some days I think I'm done today. And then other days, I think I could do it the rest of my life. I am inspired by people that I see who are in their 70s or their 80s or their 90s, and they're still doing a job, whether it's a paid job or a volunteer job, and they do it because it sparks their heart. So for me, there will be a point where I would like to transition my company where I'm not the everyday hands-on person, but I actually haven't really decided. I would need to have there be a way that I was still involved.
Right.
And my favorite thing to do still, absolutely my favorite thing is give me a room with 100 smokers and chewers. That's my favorite, because what I love is teaching people in a way that they walk in with an expectation and they walk out with that completely shattered. Typically, they think they know everything. They think they've tried everything. And what I say is, you haven't tried Nancy yet, give it a try. And if we can get people to sit through the first hour, they will complete the program. Right. So I think what I believe, Brad, is I believe the way we have structured this with my content, with my intellectual property protection, I feel like the future for me is I can do what I want. I still, I have this other dream. See, I did pretend I'm in Hawaii today, in case you didn't notice. And this is my Starbucks Hawaii cup. My dream is someday to have time to be at the ocean and walk along the ocean and pick up trash. It's one of my dreams. So what I would like to have this intellectual property do is hold up my company, keep it going forward, keep reaching more and more people, and give me time to be on the ocean in Hawaii picking up trash. And when I'm there, I can guarantee I'll talk to the smokers I run into. So.
That is a wonderful story. And the nice thing about intellectual property, as you know, Nancy, is if we do the fundamentals correctly and build a good, strong foundation, there's no reason it cannot generate revenue for you, your buyers, people who you may work with in the future, relatives that you want to maybe have be involved with you later. I don't know, whomever. But the point is that if we do it correctly, the revenue model of intellectual property is ongoing. And you could license these copyrights in the courseware for the next 50, 75 years if you wanted to. The content doesn't really ever grow old. I mean, I guess a pill that people take and they no longer have a desire to smoke, but your content remains relevant, and you've done the fundamentals to make sure that you have an ongoing revenue stream for effectively forever if you want, because we paid attention to the fundamentals. Well, Nancy, I'm going to look to you to see if you want to offer any concluding comments to our Boise Startup Week participants. What words of encouragement would you give to an entrepreneur with an idea who wants to move forward with that idea? What would you advise them, a young startup entrepreneur today?
You know what? I think that I wish I would have done this, Brad, or maybe if I would have done it, then I never would have taken this leap. I followed my interest. I followed my curiosity. I followed my own, I reflected on my own path. This is back in 1990, 1991. I'm a nurse, but I became a hypnotherapist, and I started hypnotizing smokers thinking, oh, that'll fix them. And when it didn't, I just let my own intellectual curiosity and interest keep pulling me. I swear it was like, well, how come, where was that puzzle piece? Why didn't that work? And why didn't this work? So I believe if you're going to put yourself in a position where you start up a company, that it should be a company not to make money. It should be a company to help people. And it should be a company to keep you engaged in your life and curious and interested in the topic. So if I would have known, it's a lot of work. I mean, anybody who's been self-employed, I've been doing this since 1990, but after 6 years, I incorporated. So I've been doing this for 30 years. Yeah. And I'm still fascinated, and I'm still curious. And if you're starting up a company to make money, but you are not curious and interested, I don't think you'll stick it out past the 2-year mark or the 3-year mark or I think there has to be an internal piece. And I don't even know, like people go, Nancy, you're so passionate. Well, sometimes I am, right? And sometimes I'm not, but I always feel curious about the topic. If somebody says, you know what, how do you help somebody quit? And I ask them, how have you tried? My head is always interested in engaging them and learning from them. And I learn stuff every single day with this company and with what I do with people. So that's what I would say is don't go into it for the money, because then you have your whole life and then you have a checkbook that somebody else inherits when you're dead. So pick something that would be fun. And I've had tremendous fun and met tremendous people over the years. So that's my advice.
That is just great advice, Nancy. And I hope that our guests today, if nothing else, that they listen to the last few minutes there where you spoke about curiosity and interest and passion and how that will drive you as a young entrepreneur. And I think it shows every day when I work with you, Nancy. I still, even after all these years, 10 years, I still see that energy, that drive, that curiosity, that enthusiasm. I mean, we had any number of phone calls where I can hear the emotion in your voice still about this program and how strongly you feel about
still
it.
There.
That passion, that passion served you well. And then to come full circle on our topic today, we have underscored that emotional and intellectual passion that you bring as the CEO with, I think, good foundational intellectual property and contract law protection, so that even though money might not be your driving principle, we have created some tools to allow you to monetize this wonderful program, Quit with Nancy.
Right. Don't start the company to make money, but you sure want to figure out how to make money, because otherwise you don't have a company, right? And that was, I think I wish, another thing I wish, Brad, is I wish I would have early on studied more about running a company. But, I learned it as I went. I feel like you've been tremendous, Brad, in helping me structure that piece of this. So thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.